Hello and welcome to the podcast episode on the Dyatlov Pass incident. My name is Joey Durham, your host, and we will be discussing the Dyatlov Pass incident that happened in 1959, the winter of 1959 in the Siberian wilderness. So, First off, I'll start by introducing the people who are most pertinent to this story. Igor Dyatlov, Ludmila Dubinina, Zenaida Kolmogrova, Rustem Slobodin, George Krivonoshenko, Alexander Kolvatov, Semyon Zolotarev, Nikolai Thibodeau-Brignol, Yuri Doroshenko, and Yuri Yudin. So for brevity, I'm going to most likely just go by their last names. So this group was a group of very experienced hikers and had vast knowledge of hiking, specifically Igor Dyatlov, who was 23, who had led a party the previous year on the same route. And it's important to know the historical context of this trip because according to Mountain of the Dead, the Dyatlov Pass incident by Keith McCloskey, written in 2013, he had said that this trip was in honor of the 21st Communist Party Congress held in Moscow from the 27th of January to the 5th of February in 1959. So with all of the censorship in the USSR, no one wanted any of this to come out and receive the negative publicity that they knew that it was going to, because this group of hikers was lost. So they had stopped in an abandoned village January 27th and spent the night there. And this was where Yuri Yudin had decided to turn back because he was sick. So they had planned to reach Mount Otorten, which literally means don't go there in Mansi, the local language, but ended up on the 1078 mountain named Kholat Syakhl, which literally means the Mountain of the Dead. So, yeah, that's not great. But the whole trip was supposed to be from January 23rd and was expected to take 22 days. Or 20 days. I don't specifically know based off of the dates, but according to Keith McCloskey, the group did not have radio, and the first indication that all was not well was on the 12th of February when Igor Dyatlov was meant to send a message by telegram to the University of from Vizhay, confirming that the trip was virtually complete and they were in Vizhay on their way back. So these people were all a part of this university sports club, and they were going after so they were actually trying to earn their grade 3 hiking rating according to the history collections The Grim Theories Behind the Dyatlov Pass Incident by Amy Heidelberg, written May 25th, 2023. And these people were very, very experienced hikers again. So when no one had heard from them by February 20th, they started to get very, very worried. And by February 26th, the camp was actually finally found by search and rescue volunteers, the military, even the Mansi people had come out and helped find the bodies and everything that was found. So first things that were found was the tent. The tent was shredded from the inside out. They just shredded them to get out. So obviously something was awry, but they were all trying to keep their positivity and hope out that these people were still alive. So based off of footprints, they could see that they ran out of the tents wearing little to nothing. One of them had one shoe on and the rest were wearing socks, and it would have been negative 24 degrees out on this mountain, not to mention that they're standing on snow. So 1 mile away from the tent, the first two bodies were found, the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and George Krivnishenko. They were found lying perfectly side by side, wearing only their underwear. They were found under a cedar tree. Branches very high up on the tree were broken, and investigators also found traces of human skin and blood leading up to the broken branches, and this correlated with their hands being torn up and being very bloody. So Doroshenko was found with burns on the side of his face, ears, nose, lips, and lips were... Sorry about that. No. He had burns on the side of his face. His ears, nose, and lips were covered in blood. He had multiple abrasions on his arms, legs, and torso, and there was a foamy gray discharge that was coming from his mouth and on his cheeks, and the doctors that did his autopsy believe that this could have been caused by something causing great pressure on his chest, and this will come back in the other autopsies that we discuss. And Krivnishenko had bruises on his forehead and his left temporal bone, chest, legs, and hands. He had pieces of skin that had ripped off the top of his hands, and those pieces of skin were found inside his mouth. He also had a burn on his left leg. And this was thought that Doroshenko and Krivnishenko they had a fire near them, so they were probably trying to warm up, but didn't feel themselves getting burned because they already had frostbite. So a little bit of a ways away, they found 3 more bodies, including Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. All 3 were found like they were running back to the campsite, and they just fell dead on their way back. Dyatlov was found face up, and he had no internal injuries, but he was frozen and clutching a birch branch in his hand, and his other arm was up as if to protect his face from something. He had no internal injuries. Like I said, his cause of death was hypothermia. However, based off of his autopsy, he had dried blood on the lips. There were numerous dark red scratches on the lower third of his right forearm and the palms of his hands. There were red or brown bruises in the area of the metacarpophalangeal joints on the right hand, a common injury in hand fights using fists, so fist fighting, which is quite interesting because Slobodin also had bruises on the metacarpophalangeal joints of both hands, but Dyatlov's right hand was the only one that was affected by that injury. So it's interesting. Maybe they got into a fight, whatever. So Slobodin was found a little bit of ways away, lying face down in the snow. He had bloody discharge from his nose, swelling and weird bruises and abrasions on the right side of his face, more abrasions on the left side of his face. His skin had been ripped off his right forearm and had bruises on the joints of both hands. again indicating that he was fighting with someone. And he had a deep 7-inch long fracture on the frontal bone of his skull, and he had hemorrhages in his temporalis muscles, which could have been due to BFT, which would have resulted in a loss of coordination. And Kolmogorova was the third to be found in that grouping area, and she was found with blood all around her body, and her cause of death was due to hypothermia due to a violent accident. So it seems like these three may have been in a very violent situation together, and maybe that had something to contribute to some stuff. So the rest of the bodies were found on May 4th. Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotarev, Nicholas Thibodeau Brignoli, and Ludmila Dubinina. So they were found in a gully downslope from the tree where the first two bodies were found. They were found wearing a lot more clothes, and there's indications that they may have taken clothes off of the first two bodies of the hikers and put them on themselves. So they cut them off post-mortem. They had dug themselves into the snow to fend off the cold, placing branches from the cedar tree to not have contacts with the walls of the snow. And they had started a small fire for a small amount of time. The one weird thing about these 4 people had all had their chest crushed inwards. Zolotarev was missing both of his eyes. He had crushed ribs and a caved-in chest with massive internal damage, massive external damage, but no internal damage. And he had an open wound on the side of his head. So, based off of his autopsy, he had 5 broken ribs on his right side with 2 fracture lines, and he had an open wound on the right side of his exposed bone measuring 8 by 6 centimeters. So the next person that we'll talk about is Ludmila Dubinina. Hers is particularly brutal. So her autopsy says that it does not state that it was torn out, but her tongue was missing, along with the muscles of the floor of her mouth. And it was also said that she was alive. Her at least her heart was beating and blood was flowing when her tongue was removed, because there was 100 grams of coagulated blood in her stomach. She had soft tissue missing around the eyes, eyebrows, left temporal area with partially exposed bone. Both of her eyes were missing, similar to Zolotarev. Her nose cartilage had been broken and flattened. 4 ribs were broken on the right side with 2 fracture lines visible. 6 ribs were broken with 2 fracture lines visible on her left side. Soft tissue of the upper lip missing. Teeth and upper jaw were exposed. Massive hemorrhage in the heart's right atrium. Bruise in the middle left thigh measuring 10 by 5 centimeters, and damaged tissues around the left temporal bone measuring 4 by 4 centimeters. She was wearing 2 sweaters and 2 shirts. She wasn't wearing any footwear. And she had cut a sweater in half to attempt to protect her feet. And her cause of death was stated as hemorrhage into the right atrium of the heart, multiple fractured ribs, and internal bleedings. Her fractures were symmetrical and are believed to be impossible due to falling onto rocks, quite apart from the lack of any external marks on the skin. So next we're going to talk about Alexander Kolvetov. He was found close to the den, and his autopsy says there a lack of soft tissue around the eyes, his eyebrows were missing, skull bone exposed, broken nose, open wound behind the ear, deformed neck, and intraval subluxation of the foot, which was bandaged with a piece of cloth. So this probably happened while they were hiking. He just subluxated his bone, and that's where your joints have so much strain on them that they almost come out of the socket and dislocate. And there's nothing noted in the autopsy about his cause of death specifically. And then there's Thibodeau. Thibodeau, his autopsy says there were multiple fractures to the temporal bone with extensions to the frontal and sphenoid bones, hemorrhage on the lower forearm measuring 10 by 12 centimeters, and a bruise on the left side of the upper lip. A fall onto some kind of rock as the cause for large and unusual skull fracture was dismissed by the autopsy, which leaves the question, what damaged his skull? There are a bunch of theories, obviously. Avalanche, fights, attacks by criminals, special forces, all of these things. So let's talk about some of the theories that we're going to kind of debunk here. Avalanche, which was not plausible for a multitude of reasons, like the tree line in the area was unaffected by anything like an avalanche. If there was an avalanche, they would have most likely been fully covered in snow by the time that they were found, and the 4 people who weren't found till May, they were wearing all of those clothes and dug a hole for them to ride out the weather, like a large enough hole for them to ride out the weather in. They couldn't have gotten all those extra clothes if the other people didn't have time to get their other clothes either. So the wild animal theories, there were just no other footprints or track marks that were found in the area, so that's not a plausible claim. There's a theory about the mink, which is a fictional Russian Yeti, was to blame, as the injuries inflicted upon the last 3 kills would have only been able to be done by something of that magnitude. This is an okay theory, but there's not really any concrete evidence to actually show us that that is what had happened. And the last one that I want to discuss is the UFO involvement claim. So, from Mountain of the Dead, the Dyatlov Pass incident by Keith McCloskey, Keith had said, quote, "A criminal investigation had been started to try and get to the bottom of what happened. This investigation is the cause of much controversy. The man in charge was Lev Ivanov. After his retirement, he eventually went to live in Kazakhstan, and his personal view was that there was UFO involvement in the deaths of the Dyatlov group." I don't know exactly if I believe in the UFO theory. There's this whole light theory that there's multiple stories from people within this area, but it doesn't seem plausible enough. Yes, there are eyewitness accounts, but if you've ever listened to any true crime podcast, you will know that eyewitness accounts, or followed up with any sort of article or thing about true crime, you'll know that eyewitness accounts are oftentimes very unreliable. So we take this with a grain of salt. And I am no hater on UFOs, trust me. I believe UFOs, extraterrestrial life, all of that is very, very much real. But for this case, it just doesn't really fully make sense. Okay, so now we're going to go into Alexander Golikov's theory. And his theory has 3 main points. So based on Soviet era's political intrigue, the theory centers on power struggle between top Communist Party figures in Moscow. During the Congress, military officers connected to a senior party boss illegally used a military helicopter for a private hunting trip in the Ospia Valley, and the KGB allegedly planned to use this misuse to discredit a political rival and gathering photographic evidence. So we already know at this point that the Dyatlov group had scheduled this hike in honor of the 21st Communist Party Congress that was underway in Moscow. So a big part of Golikov's theory is that he suspects that Zolotarev was an alias for someone with a vague biography and possibly was linked to the KGB. He thinks that Zolotarev was tasked with photographing the illegal helicopter use using a special camera hidden in isotope-marked clothing, and he also claims that Zolotarev's burial location and his sudden addition to the group raised suspicion. So now we're just going to quickly run through a timeline of events according to Alexander Golikov's theory to see if it would actually make sense. So late January 1959, the Communist Party Congress is underway in Moscow. Military is under enhanced service mode, which means no equipment or personnel leave without approval. A group of high-ranking military officers connected to a top Moscow party boss uses a military helicopter for a private hunting trip in the Ospia Valley illegally. So pre-February 1st, 1959, KGB operation is underway. Rival party bosses allegedly order the KGB to secretly photograph the illegal helicopter used to discredit the political opponent. A special camera with date and time recording is prepared and wrapped in isotope-marked clothing for tracking. Semyon Zolotarev joins the Dyatlov group at the last minute, which is true, he joined at the last minute, tasked with taking the photographs. The agreed drop-off point for the camera was near the Dyatlov storage shed. So the 30th to the 31st of January 1959, Dyatlov group's movements. After Yudin turns back, the group travels slowly, possibly waiting for the right timing. Their route includes odd detours, moving away from the Ospia River, then returning, possibly to avoid encountering the hunters, which are the Mansi hunters that assist as beaters for the hunt. And Igor Dyatlov's diary also notes this change in path. So February 1st, 1959 was the key incident. Zolotarev allegedly photographs the illegal helicopter use while it is in the area. He is seen taking the photos, possibly with Dyatlov present. Both quickly rejoin the group. The Dyatlov group hastily relocates their camp to the slope of Kholat Syakhl, likely trying to hide. Military personnel sent to recover the incriminating camera track the group, possibly by helicopter. They find the tent and confront the hikers. An altercation occurs. Military men trained in unarmed combat kill without leaving obvious external injuries. Initial instructions to avoid bloodshed are abandoned after resistance from the group. The night of the 1st to the 2nd of February 1959, elimination of survivors. Some group members flee and are injured but are still alive. The next morning, approximately 6 to 7 a.m., military personnel return, locate survivors, and finish them off. Example, Dubinina and Zolotarev killed using putties to compress the carotid artery. Bodies are left in various locations, some thrown into a snow hole. Tracks are erased using broad skis to avoid detection. Post-incident, the cover-up. Military and KGB both seek the camera but avoid implicating themselves. Investigation led by Lev Ivanov is intentionally vague. Avalanche and missile theories are dismissed. Criminal version is suppressed and area is closed for tourists for 4 years. In May 1959, camera is found. Zolotarev's body is recovered with the special camera. The camera is sent to Sverdlovsk. No photos directly implicate the military in the deaths, but the helicopter misuse is confirmed. The aftermath, now, the truth remains hidden in classified military KGB and Ministry of Defense archives, and Gilikov believes that the Dyatlov group's elimination was a political cover-up rather than a natural disaster. So that was basically a timeline of events for Alexander Gilikov's theory. And honestly, it sounds very, very compelling argument, because as we know, especially from investigating conspiracies and the MK Ultra incident, the government is very good. Every government is very good at keeping things hidden and doing cover-ups. It does make sense with the injuries that Zolotarev and Dubinina had as a result of this attack from the military, and with the injuries on Slobodin and Dyatlov, they had clearly gotten into a fistfight, and it was also noted that there was blood all around Kolmogorova, but she didn't seem to have any specific wounds, that the blood was coming from her. So in that sense, the theory 100% does work. One thing, actually there's a lot of things that kind of stick out to me that don't work with this theory though. The massive amount of impact that it takes to crush someone, as the 4 other people that were found dead in that gully, that it is an insane amount of force that you have to brutally murder someone that way and crush their ribs and their lungs so that they die. Not to mention that one of the people, Doroshenko, one of the first people found, he had this gray discharge coming from his mouth and on his cheek, and the doctors think that this could have been caused by something causing great pressure on his chest. Which, what would that be in this case? Like, I wouldn't be able to tell what that would be unless like the helicopter landed on them, but even then that's not very likely at all, because then they would have to be out by that tree, and it just wouldn't have worked out that way, and it wouldn't have played out that way. I think all in all though, especially with the brutal injuries of Zolotarev and Dubinina missing both of their eyes, well, the last 4 people really, they were all together. We know that because Zolotarev was in the group. So if Zolotarev was in the group and he was the one that the military was going after, they would have probably caused more damage to these people than the other 5 people that were there and they died of hypothermia. Because yes, they did die of hypothermia, and most of these people died of hypothermia except for Dubinina, because she died of that hemorrhage in her heart. And I wonder if Zolotarev and Dubinina had more of a strong connection than we initially thought, because she was basically tortured. Like, her tongue was ripped out of her mouth. Like, you don't get those injuries from a weather event. You don't get those injuries from an avalanche. Like, that's not... Yes, you get injuries from an avalanche, but you don't get your tongue ripped out of your mouth while you're still alive. If that's not torture, I don't know what torture is, but it seems to me like it's torture. So I do completely agree with this conspiracy claim. It makes the most sense. Things can escalate all the time, especially when military's involved, and like in this era of such like aggressiveness in terms of what side you're on. It feels very similar to the US, like right now with the lefts and the rights and the Republicans and the Democrats fighting all the time and saying, oh, you're bad, you're awful. It's very reminiscent of that. So I do agree with it. And based off of all of the injuries, it makes sense. Why would Dyatlov and Slobodin be fighting each other and there be blood all around Kolmogorova, and the rest of the bodies of Kolovatov, Zolotarev, Thibodeau, Dubinina, why would they have been found basically crushed and with all of these horrible injuries that they wouldn't have... This wouldn't have been the case that they were attacked by the military and like some stuff had gone down that had been wrong and that it went the wrong way, and then there was a cover-up. It makes sense. So that was my podcast episode. Very long podcast episode on the Dyatlov Pass incident. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for listening.